Wow, thank you so much. Good morning, hello, happy Sabbath. My name is Kathy, and like Craig just said, this is my second time speaking here. So thank you for having me back, and thank you to all of my friends and family who are here to support me. So I gave my first sermon right before I started attending Union Theological Seminary in New York, where I currently live and am studying psychology and religion. And I had this idea that after talking to you all about deconstruction last year, I'd go to seminary for a year and come back with this gambit of things that I've reconstructed and present to you a fully fledged theology of my own that I've meticulously researched, tested, and lived out. So now, I'm here today to tell you that, drum roll please, that is not what I have prepared. In fact, in a recent conversation I had with a friend, I said that in terms of the giant pile of rubble that make up my former beliefs, I've put together like maybe 2 bricks. But that's not to discount the spiritual and theological work that I have done. In the past year, I've learned a lot. I've taken all of these classes, I've done all of these readings. This is for one class, by the way, and I definitely read all of them very thoroughly. I saw my time at seminary to be very single-minded. I always said, I'm here to prove that everything I was told growing up that is unholy is in fact holy. I was there to do one thing, to disprove through intense biblical and theological scholarship and serious academic research on the sociocultural, historical, and literary realities behind, within, and in front of our scriptures and traditions, to disprove that the God that I grew up with is not this homophobic, transphobic, queerphobic, racist, sexist, misogynistic God that I was always told that he is. And I did that, essentially confirming what I always knew by getting a master's degree. But okay, so now I know what God is not. So what is God? And that's the topic of today's sermon, know thy God, which I adapted from something that Socrates once said about knowing yourself. So what does it mean to know yourself? And what does it mean to know your God, the God that you worship? These are the questions that we'll be trying to answer today. So I want to start with a visual exercise. So I want you all to close your eyes, and I'm going to give you a few moments of silence to think about for yourself, what does God look like? All right, go ahead and open your eyes now. Now, I don't know what each one of you pictured just now, but here are some popular examples of what Christians might picture when they think of God. Maybe you thought of a warm, bright light breaking through the clouds, or maybe you thought of a beautiful scene from nature. Maybe you thought of God as a person, so here are some popular examples of that. We have this lovely painting here of Jesus by Warner Salmon. I included it because I felt like I've seen this exact painting of Jesus in every church that I went to growing up. And then we have Michelangelo's creation of Adam, which is super iconic. So what do you observe with these depictions of God? Go ahead and just yell them out. Peace? Okay. Anything else? So my observations, we have this old white straight man in the sky. We have Anglo-Saxon European Jesus, who is blonde, blue-eyed, and doesn't at all correspond to the historical Jesus, who's a Palestinian Jewish man living in Galilee during the 1st century. But even in these images of light or of nature, what do you notice? They're completely devoid of people. So what does it mean that our image of God doesn't include ourselves? Before I started at Union, I had no spiritual life, and that wasn't for a lack of trying. Having been born and raised in an evangelical Christian church with my grandfather being a pastor, I was an extremely devout child, which is kind of weird to say, but it's true. I went to every Sabbath school, every Friday night Vespers, every vacation Bible school. I read my Bible for fun. I kept the Sabbath as best as I could, and I prayed all the time. I prayed before every meal, before bed, before every test, before every race, at every swim meet. And yet, despite how hard and how often I prayed, despite being desperate to feel like God was by my side and hearing my prayers. God always felt so far away. So why did God feel so far away when I was trying so hard? Dr. Christina Cleveland gives a really good answer to this question in her book, God is a Black Woman. Dr. Cleveland is a theologian and social psychologist, and in her book, she talks about two terms, Father Sky God and white male God. Now, even without defining these terms for you, you can maybe hazard a guess as to what they mean, right? Cleveland writes that Father Sky God is up there in the spiritual realm. In fact, in order to reach him, we must heal ourselves of our human maladies, find ways to escape from the heartbreak of this life, and be presentable to a male God who is deeply detached from the human condition. And this is the God that I grew up with. This is the God that I was taught, conditioned, made to believe in. And this is the God that I was praying to. So there's no wonder that he felt so inaccessible, because Father Sky God is exactly that, inaccessible. And white male God demands perfection before salvation. And so this is why when I felt like God was so absent, like I was talking to nobody, I was just told that I have to have more faith or I have to praise God more. And growing up, I always thought I was the problem. But now I know that it wasn't me. It was the paradigm under which I was thinking of and relating to God that was the problem. Because if Father Sky God is up there in the spiritual realm, then he cannot be down here with us in the mundane physical world. Now, I don't have time to summarize all of Cleveland's book today, but I highly recommend reading it for yourself. It's a book about theology, yes, but it's also deeply personal, and it's about Dr. Cleveland herself and the incredible 400-mile walking pilgrimage she took across France, visiting ancient and holy sites of Black Madonnas. But the thesis of her book, and what concerns us here today, is the life-giving and soul-nourishing effects that come from remembering and celebrating the inherent femininity of God alongside God's masculinity. I always thought that if God is God, right, so infinite, omnipotent, all-powerful, beyond space and time itself, then God must certainly be beyond a binary construct of gender, right? But in our pursuit of Father Sky God and white male God, in the ways that it's ingrained into our history, in our culture, within our own bodies, we always seem to forget this fact. But when we go from God the Father to God the Mother, we go from transcendence to immanence, from Father Sky God to Emmanuel, God is with us. And Cleveland writes that although many of us conceive of Christ as solely male, the Divine Mother is the one who most closely represents the earthy, gritty nearness of Jesus Christ, who said, "Take, eat, this is my body, this is my blood." Cleveland cites Julian of Norwich, who wrote that Jesus Christ is our true mother. We received our being from him, and this is where his maternity starts. And historically speaking, we can find several examples of people thinking of Jesus Christ and God as possessing both masculine and feminine characteristics and embodying both God the Father and God the Mother. 20th century Pope John Paul I said in 1978, God is Father, but especially Mother. And we can, of course, find God as both Mother and Father in my favorite book in the Bible, the book of Job. In chapter 38, verses 28 to 29, has the rain a father, or who has begotten the drops of dew? From whose womb did the ice come forth, and who has given birth to the hoarfrost of heaven? And what I appreciate most about thinking of God as mother is that it's an immediately palpable experience, right? Traditionally speaking, the gender role of the mother is someone who deals with the ickiness of life. As Cleveland says, mothers are imminent, especially when we're a mess. They come running when we're sick, when we're bleeding, when we're puking, when we have diarrhea. So to summarize, historically, societally, and culturally speaking, we've been taught to think of God as this untouchable, perfect, masculine being who sits up in the sky, totally devoid of the nitty-grittiness and oftentimes ugliness of the human condition. But once we remember and celebrate God's sacred femininity, we begin to expand our image of God, and thus expand our relationship to and our experience of God. But I want to caution you that this paradigm shift is not easy. When we're taught to think about and relate to God in one particular way, the consequences of thinking that way has far-reaching implications into all aspects of our lives, even when we're aware of it and actively working to change and expand our thinking. This is what Cleveland had to say about her own experience confronting Father Sky God and white male God. She writes, "Waking up to the reality of white male God is deeply stunning. So I clung to this truth about the sacred Black feminine as I staggered towards healing. But as I began to face the terrible truth that the spiritual community of my origin lied to me about who God is, how God relates to me, and who I am, I lost myself in a storm of debilitating grief and rage." Have you ever felt this way? I know I have. I definitely went through a time when I really hated God, and I hated the church, and I hated religion as a whole. I felt so hurt and angry and helpless about the realities of Father Sky God and white male God. But my story didn't end there. And Cleveland goes on to write, "Even more, when I began to take seriously the truth that God is not white or male, I was swept away in a whirlwind of destabilizing uncertainty as questions I thought I had airtight answers to, like, who is God? What is true? And where do I find spiritual community that is not patriarchal or anti-Black, simply led to more troubling questions. Who am I? And will I survive this?" And these questions are at the heart of this sermon and my work at Divinity School. This is what theology is, and this is what spirituality is. In my last sermon, I cited the great theologian James Cone because his definition of theology is my favorite definition of theology. And he says that theology is the continued attempt in every generation to define your reason for being in this world. And I believe that before you can really define and, more importantly, live out your reasons for being in this world, you must first be able to answer these questions. Who is God, and who am I? And so we arrive back to where we started, know thy God. In preparation for this sermon, I asked a few of my friends and family to fill in the blank. God is. This was really fun, and I encourage you to both ask yourself and your friends and family what they think God is. And so now I'd like to share some of my favorites. God is love. God is more than you can imagine. God is fat and queer and exactly what I need when I need it. God is too immense for words and yet tiny enough to fit in me. God is beyond. God is beyond every human conception. God's love is beyond our love. God's power is beyond our power. God's self goes beyond any human conception, formulation, text, description, and so on. God is possible, as in could be many things, could enable many things. God is something we will never fully grasp. This one's good. God is paradox. And then this is from The Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. And she writes, "God is power, infinite, irresistible, inexorable, indifferent, and yet God is pliable. Trickster, teacher, chaos, clay. God exists to be shaped. God is change." Now, we could go on and on with different perspectives and definitions and opinions about what God is. And like I said, I think this is a worthwhile endeavor, as how other people define God may inspire, challenge, and or expand the ways that you're thinking about God. But describing what God is, trying to put into words what we think God is only one way of knowing God. And to be honest, it's a kind of knowing that I find is not always productive or helpful. So to explain, let's go from the title of today's sermon, Know Thy God, back to what Socrates originally said, know thyself. So how do you know yourself? I don't know about you, but I've always hated those icebreakers where you have to introduce yourself in front of a group of people. And I'm sure you've experienced this before. They say okay, say your name, preferred pronouns if you feel comfortable, maybe where you were born or where you came from, or call home. Maybe you're asked to say your favorite flavor of ice cream or use 3 adjectives to describe yourself. So I could say, hi, I'm Kathy. My pronouns are she, her. I'm from Seattle, but New York feels more like home to me now. And 3 adjectives that describe me are creative, introverted, and always tired. It's true. Now, we all know that being creative, introverted, and tired only describes a small part of me. And I don't think after hearing those things, anyone would say, yeah, I know Kathy, she's creative, introverted, and always tired. But what's funny is that in the process of trying to know myself by describing myself, I'm suddenly struck with the feeling that maybe I actually don't know myself at all. In high school, I had a substitute teacher for English, and I think it was 12th grade English, and one day he gave me a laminated piece of paper that said, "Know thyself" on it. I remember putting it right above my full-length mirror in my bedroom, and I still have it 8 years later. This is what it looks like. And in a way, this piece of paper has given me a lot of trouble because I just can't shake the feeling that I don't really know myself. Do you ever feel like there are 2 versions of yourself? A false self and a true self? For a long time, I was obsessed with discovering my true self, and I think it's because I felt pressured to only show the world this polished, put-together, perfect self and hide the messy, makes mistakes, failing self. And I want to read the introduction to this academic article by Edward McGushin on Foucault's theory and practice of subjectivity. And now, I don't want you to get intimidated by the title, as I think what's in this article does a really, really good job at summarizing what I'm trying to get at. So he writes, everyone at some point has heard that seemingly ubiquitous advice, just be yourself. Keep it real, be true to yourself, be your own person, find yourself, express yourself, be confident in yourself, and so on and so forth. And on one hand, the guidance seems completely natural. Are we all not trying our best to be ourselves? And yet, on the other hand, the directive, be yourself, sometimes sounds strangely hollow. After all, who else could I possibly be but myself? Yeah, of course, everyone is familiar with the many ways we fail to be ourselves. The pressures to conform, to mask, to deny ourselves. We say what we think others want us to say. We act the way others want us to act. We lie to ourselves, betray ourselves, forget ourselves, let ourselves down, and neglect ourselves. And on top of all of this, we live at a time of rapidly advancing technologies for the chemical manipulation of moods and the genetic engineering of physical and mental traits. Faced with the capacity to transform one's mood, memory, longevity, or sexuality through chemical or genetic manipulation, what could it possibly mean to just be yourself? How can you possibly know yourself? What is a self? What is God? In academia, we call the pursuit of trying to boil something down to its core, its true self or its essence, we call that pursuit essentialism. And I have a big problem with essentialism because I don't think it's very helpful. A mentor recently told me in response to me expressing this kind of existential crisis, not knowing who I am, asking who is the real Kathy? Is she creative, introverted, and always tired? Or is that just the outward-facing Kathy that the world sees? Who is the real Kathy beneath all of that facade? What is the essence of Kathy? What makes Kathy Kathy? And he said this. He said, I don't know about whether there is a true self or a core sense of self. I don't even know if that exists. I'm more interested in thinking about what gives you energy, what excites you, what motivates and drives you, what inspires you, what keeps you going. And that, a call to action, to do something that nourishes you, that gives you life, is what I think essentialism often misses out on. Belief or knowledge initiates and guides action, or it does nothing at all. And for me, it's not just about knowing and believing, it's about doing. It's not just about being, it's about becoming. McGushin writes, if subjectivity is an active becoming rather than a fixed being, then the quest to discover or find oneself in the form of an essence is futile. In other words, we should be less concerned about knowing ourselves for the sake of knowing ourselves. But rather, we should know ourselves so that it moves us to do something, to make something, to change something in the world. We must know ourselves not just so that we can define ourselves and summarize ourselves in a resume or a dating profile, but we must know ourselves so that we can continue attempting to define and live out our reasons for being in this world. And in this article, Migushin talks about how in ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, self-knowledge, knowing thyself, was pursued only to the extent that it was necessary in order to take care of oneself. And that is what I'm interested in, taking care of yourself. So my question is this: how does my knowing of God create a gateway for knowing how to take care of myself? I can know that God is love, and God is infinity, and God is beyond anything I can imagine. But what does that knowing do? Where does that knowing lead me? What actions am I inspired to take or not take because of what I know about God and about myself? I'm happy to report after a year of seminary, my spiritual life is now alive and thriving and growing every day. And I still struggle with prayer, but I find myself always coming back to one prayer, which is, God, let me become the person that you want me to become. Or just simply, may I become the person that I was meant to become. And I want to leave you with one quote from Migushin, which I find really beautiful and hopeful. He writes, knowing God and knowing yourself is a matter of strenuous trying and determined artfulness, because the self is a continuous becoming, it's not a fixed being. And consequently, the art of becoming myself is always to some extent an art of no longer being what I was, an art that detaches the self from itself in order to form new, deeper, wiser relationship to itself and to God, which in turn will give way to its own self-distancing, sending me on my way towards unknown futures. And so I lead you with these questions. How are you embodying and fleshing, bringing to life and into existence the ways you know God and know yourself? Who is the person that you were meant to become? The person God created you to become? These questions don't have simple answers. And if anything, the answers are always changing and evolving as you change and evolve. But my hope is that in asking these questions, you'll feel closer to God and be more able to grasp and live out your reasons for being in this world. Thank you.